Hey, David Raffoff here. Hope you're having a good day. Today I thought it'd be fun to go through and kind of tackle some changes in the code that have to do with recent changes happening with React. There's kind of been a push to move away from class-based components to functional components. And that's being made possible by some recent changes with the introduction of hooks, which really help get away from being dependent on the lifecycle methods and also kind of local state management stuff that was easier to do with classes. So in this video, I thought it'd be fun to go through this little application that's up on the left over here that I've been using. And I'll put a link to the full source code for this application in the description. But I'm going to switch over here just so I can show you what that is real quick. So here we have just a simple application, hits an API for Star Wars related information. When we hit refresh here, it's going to load up just a list of characters, and you can click through those and pull up, info on those characters. And then if you want to here, you can just do a search, and that will just do another API call and then come back with a list of the relevant characters here. So one thing that's cool too is part of what I wanted to do with this demo app is make sure I have really good test coverage. So you can see on the right here, I've got tests up, and the coverage is pretty good, especially for components. I think it might be 100% for components. So we're in a really good state to just go in and start making some big changes and not worry too much about totally screwing up the application. So I haven't really prepared any of this in advance. This is just going to be kind of a live coding session, so you'll get to see me kind of go through and do this, fumble around and make some mistakes as I go. If you're new to coding, give you a better idea of what it's like and when you're actually going in and coding and trying to figure out why things aren't working. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and hop into it. It's probably gonna be a little bit longer video than usual, but yeah, I look forward to doing it. So here we go. So first thing to do is to hop into the code, and I'm probably going to start with some of the simpler components to begin with. So one of the components that we were looking at was this one here that shows the details about the character. So I thought we could go ahead and just get that one converted. And I do happen to know I'm using the type for functional component somewhere else. So I'm just going to kind of steal this syntax here for a second. We'll take that. Then we'll go back over to that character's detail. And so what we want to do here is we want to get away from using the React class and instead just use a function. And that's going to require some changes. So the way that the functions work is they should return the JSX that you expect to be rendered versus having a render method that's called and then whatever supporting methods or state or whatever you want to have. So the first thing I'm going to do is just come in here and bring this in. Now I'm already exporting character at the bottom, so I'm going to get rid of that export. So we don't need that. We don't need this. We do need character, so I'm going to bring that up here. And this doesn't need to extend anything since it's just a function. So I think this is stateless functional component. Let's see. Yeah. And another thing you'll see too is this has its own interface for the props. And I'm going to shorten up some of the stuff here and just go ahead and destructure character, which is referred to in the props interface up here. And then I just need to tell it the type. So we want to use that type that we define up above. And now I can go ahead and get rid of that. And you'll see that's cleaned up a whole bunch of the errors that we're having here. Now, the next thing that's getting confused by is these are like method definitions. So if I wanted to keep the render, I would need to do something like function here to let it know it's a function. But what we really want to do is we essentially just want to run everything that's in this render method, or what was a method. So I'm just going to pull this back, or unindent. And so there we go. And now we can see one thing that's complaining about is I no longer need to destructure character off of this dot props. I'm doing my destructuring here, and also because we're not using a class component, probably not going to want to refer to this directly. So we just have props available. But either way, I just needed to get rid of this whole line, and you can see that's cleared up. Grabbing character from up here and the destructuring of the props. And then another thing you'll see here, like I was mentioning, we're not going to refer directly to this. We should be able to just call fallback directly. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then this is written as a method, not a function. So I just want to go ahead and do function callback. And if we save that, we should be good. See if we got any other errors. I think we are okay. So we'll go ahead and do that. And switch back over here to pull up this. So this is still looking good. It's working. Our tests are still passing. So that's good. We got one of these out of the way. So now we'll move on to look at another simple one. So probably one of the simpler components is maybe this ListItem component. So maybe we can look at that one next. And again, I'm just gonna hold on to all of this just so I don't have to type it out. So we'll hop over to ListItem. And we can see here that this is a class component that's extending React component with iProps. So we're going to do a similar thing. So I'm just going to paste this in. And our iProps here are a little different. So we want character and set character. What's it complaining about? Oh, it's not a class. And do we do an export? Yeah, we're already exporting at the bottom too, so don't need to do that twice. So here we're just gonna do export or function character list item, and then I think, or sorry, const. There we go. So now all this is set up. And here, there's no need anymore to do this destructuring because we're doing that up above. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And then just to clean up these errors real quick, I'm going to go ahead and put function in front of these. Sorry, this would be a const, I guess. And then this one would be a function. And it's going to complain now because we're not returning anything. It's just because kind of like previously what we had done, we want to just return, essentially going to pull everything out of the render function and just have the character list item, the like component, do the return, the functional component. So I'm just going to get rid of the render that's wrapping this. And then we've got some more errors here, or some more warnings, I guess. So again, we don't need to destructure character out of props because that's already getting handled up above. So we'll get rid of that. And then here, we don't need to refer to on-click handler using this because we're no longer in a class. So we'll just do that. And let's see what we get. So we'll save that, and test passed, and then let's go over and check it out again. And again, it's working, so it looks like we successfully converted that one. So looking good, moving right along. Just hop over and do. There's probably additional improvements too we could do as we're going through this, but I'm gonna kind of try to just stick with. Just sticking to this transformation. We can come back and clean up other stuff later if we wanted to. But yeah, so far so good. I'm going to just confirm that the loader is set up the way we want as well. Yeah, it doesn't have any props, so I think that one's okay. Navigation bar could be interesting. Looks like this one's already set up the way we want as a functional component. So maybe we can take a look at search next. Yeah, this one will be interesting because we do have some state here. So let's just go ahead and take a look at how we want to handle this. So in a similar way, I'm going to just go ahead and grab this so I don't have to type this all out again. And I'm going to paste this up here. And what we want is a constant for character search. And the props on this are going to be just search characters. So we'll get that, destructure that right at the top. I could probably go ahead and make this a, I think this is a function. Yes, it's a function. So just go ahead and do that for now. And then we can go ahead and get rid of this. And for just a second, I'm going to comment out the state part because we'll need to do some extra stuff to handle that. And here I'm going to go ahead and make this a constant. And you can see here we're doing some state management, which we're going to have to do something a little bit different with. We're going to have to use hooks for that. But just to kind of get this a little closer, I'm going to go ahead and make these constants. Don't need to do this destructuring anymore for search characters because we're doing that up above. And then here we're going to call search characters, and I guess, yeah, we'll deal with that also in a second when we deal with the state. And then again, instead of just calling render, it's assumed that the purpose of this component is to render, so we're just going to return the JSX that we want directly. And clean this up a bit more, so we shouldn't need to call this because getting away from referring to the class instance. And some of these are still going to complain, but the handlers at least will work. So now we got everything in here cleaned up except for the state. And part of the move to the functional components is enabled by using some of the new hooks functionality. So I think what we want here is useState from React. So here I've just switched up my imports up at the top here, so now I'm including React and also including useState. And useState's one of the new hooks that's introduced in 16.8, and it's just used for managing state. And just go ahead and show you what that looks like here. So we want to have a value that we can hold on to for when somebody's typing into search. So what I'll do is set up this, it's kind of like a tuple here, and it's gonna be the, we have two items in here. The first is gonna be the name of the state, so maybe we'll call that value. That's probably fine because the context of this is a search component, but you know, it could be like term or search term or something like that if there was ambiguity for some reason. Actually, let's just use a more clear name, even though it doesn't matter. So search term, and then set search term. And we will set that equal to useState, and you have to give it an initial state, and we could just start with the empty string for that. So what's going on here is useState's going to return us a tuple, essentially, that's got the initial state for this term, and then a setter. And one thing that's important to note is you basically can't mutate this state directly. So what you always want to do is generate a new version of that state, and then use the setter to set that. And I'll show you what that looks like here. So here. here, input is basically going to be our new state, because that's what we're pulling off of the value for the change event on the field. So we should just be able to just directly do set search term with input. And I think we'll be all right there. And then submit handler is essentially the same thing. So we will go ahead and do that. But we're not saving an intermediate value. Oh, what is it doing? Set characters. Oh, I see. This is actually submitting it. Okay. Slightly different. So before we were reading value off of the state object. We don't need to do that anymore. We can just use search term. And there we go. And we have closures over these things. The search term's available, and so is the setter within within this function. And then similarly here, I don't even know if it matters. I guess we can make this search term. Let's see how it handles that. Let's see what we get. This will be interesting. So here, okay, I didn't like that. Character search is not exported. Oh, so this is one where I wasn't just exporting at the end of the file. And really, I guess with these functional components, maybe it might be better practice to just export them, because there shouldn't really be anything else in here. So if that works, I'll go back and I'll update those other ones to work like this. So let's see what we get. I guess first let's just see if our test passed. Okay, didn't like this. Type is invalid. Expected a string or class. Oh, sorry, those are old messages. Okay, so we got some state changes we'll probably have to make in the tests, because they are looking for state, and that's probably a smell too. It's kind of testing the implementation versus testing what's actually rendered. So I'm gonna leave that test alone for now, and we can kind of revisit it maybe at the end. But let's just see if this works. So Darth. And there we go. So our search component is working. So before I go forward with doing more, I'm going to go backward and do what we just talked about. So instead of doing an export default at the end, I'm just going to do export here. And we may get into trouble because we're not doing the default. But let's see. See what we get. Okay, yeah, so we're no longer using like the default export. It's using a named export, so we can just go ahead and look at where that's used, which I think is the search container. Yeah, so here we'll just want to go ahead and update this. And this is interesting. There should only really ever be one export out of these, so maybe I'll just go ahead and do export default. Let's see. Sorry, just a second. Maybe I'll leave it like that and do the export at the end. So yeah, I guess this will be the way that I keep these consistent. I'll just do the default export at the end. So that's what I'm doing there. We'll switch this one up so it's behaving the same way. What is this? Character search. Okay. So that one's good. This one's doing export default. So that's good. Let's hop over to this one. So this is using a functional component already. The props, I can destructure on the props instead of doing it there. So let's just go ahead and do that. and it's gonna show that error until I get rid of this here. So there we go. And yeah, this is already doing returns. This one's kind of long. Let's break this up a little bit. I don't think it's gonna let me do that. Let's see. That's my personal preference, but I don't think that works. Nope. Oh, actually, it might not care. Oh, I have a different problem first. Let me deal with that. Character search, it's complaining, it can't find it. Where does that get used? I think that's in the container. Yeah, so because I'm using a default export, I don't want to destructure that. So just make sure everything's working again. Yep, so we're back to a good state here. Yeah, and there we go. Sorry, I was trying to remember which one we were on. So we had moved on to the list. And when the lines get long like this, I can never remember if React lets you do this or not. But I personally like having every attribute on its own line. Let's see if it complains about that. And then if you take everything out of there and search, it'll give you a full, yeah. Okay, cool. I like that. That's easy to read. So we're in good shape on this one. So I'll just keep on moving up. And I think the last one that's left is the container. And that's going to be the hairiest one by far. I'm just going to take a quick look at this. Yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to go. We can give it a whirl. This one's going to be a lot more complicated than the other ones, just because containers are smart components that kind of know more about how your application all ties together. So there's a lot more going on. Okay, so through the power of editing, I've jumped ahead a day here and just took a little time to look into the right way to handle some things that was running into having trouble with. So here on the character container, I was able to go through and update that like I did previously for converting the class-based components to stateless functional components. But I needed to look a little bit at the right way to handle useEffect here. So there's a couple things I'll point out. With useEffect, this is basically how you're going to get a functional component to do side effects, and anything that you're relying on inside of here, you'll want to pass in here as a list of dependencies. And these are the things that basically when these update, if these update, useEffect will run again. And this get characters callback shouldn't update, but if you have to be careful about how you use useEffect, because if you do this, it'll just run every time the component's rendered, which you don't want. You'll just get a bunch of calls over and over to get characters. And if you do this, initially this is what I thought you would want to do, just say that essentially you don't care about any of the values changing. And the problem you get when you do this is you'll get warnings about relying on a prop in here that you're not specifying as a dependency. So it looked like the right thing to do was to just include this in the list of dependencies. So put get characters in here. And initially I'd had some other guards on this, like checking the length of characters. And I think that was kind of mainly to make sure that it doesn't just get called over and over again when you have characters, but this seems pretty reliable, so this is what I'm doing at the moment, just depending on get characters here. And I had to do a couple things just to make this testable, so you'll notice here I'm not just using useEffect, I'm referring to it off of React directly. And the reason for this is because at the moment there's not Enzyme's shallow rendering doesn't support useEffect at the moment, so you have to make a choice. You either need to rely on mounting the component, which I didn't want to do because this is like the top level component for characters, and that would force me to render out the entire tree, and I don't want to do that. Or you can use a different I think React Test Renderer or something like that supports useEffect, but there's a blog post here where somebody goes through and I'll put a link to it in the description, but they go through and give an example of how you can test still using shallow, and then just kind of mocking out useEffect. But in order to do that, you have to refer to useEffect off of React, and I'll show you what the testing side of that looks like here in a second. But from that point on, it's all pretty straightforward. Again, this one's just going to have a return that returns all the markup directly instead of doing it inside a render. And then we have the usual things that you have here in a kind of container smart component, where you have map state to props, map dispatch to props, and then use the higher order component to do the connect with those props, and then pull in the character container component and export that. Something else that's worth mentioning is for testing purposes, I'm actually exporting this character container also, and that just allows a little bit easier testing. So I'll hop over to the test here and just show what's changed. So here, still relying on shallow, and why is it complaining about that? It's being silly. Sorry, just hopping down here. So I've added mock useEffect, and again, there's a link in the comments here, and I'll put it in the video, to the article that describes exactly like why you would do this. But basically, you're spying on React and then providing a mock implementation for useEffect, and then down here, what you'll do in these tests is go ahead and make a just mock function for get characters, and you can provide a mock resolve value, which would be just a list of characters. And then here we call mock useEffect, and then after doing that, we can go ahead and render shallow render the component. This is just a helper that sets defaults and then passes in only the things that we want to specify here. And then after doing that, you can see here we can do an expectation that get characters has been called one time. And so yeah, just using that mock useEffect lets you test things that are inside your useEffect code. But yeah, I think that's about it. This last little bit took a little bit of reading up on, just to figure out what the right way to do this is with kind of a temporary workaround. Hopefully they'll update shallow rendering to support these React hooks here shortly, but in the meantime, this seems like a decent workaround. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this, just hit subscribe, hit the little notification bell to get notified when new videos are ready, and hit the like button, really helps out the channel. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.